Should be
I'll,
live. Can you go ahead and check on your?
yes, it says we're live.
Oh, hey everyone. I'm hosting the stream this time. He gave me the stream key because he was having internet problems.
Yay. So the stream should still be live. Everybody should be watching.
Yeah, so sorry about that confusion at first here. Also, I literally, I swear to God, I just downloaded OBS now, and yeah, he's claiming he doesn't know how to do these stream layouts, but I mean, I this is super easy. I don't know how you can't do that. There's
I
literally a fucking tab, the sources tab right there, where you can put these pictures on.
these tabs in this source tab is something that I have tremendous trouble with.
Fucking, I don't know why. It's super easy to use. But anyway, so what exactly are some of our stories today? No, I know what they are. It's a rhetorical question.
Well, let's see. I think what was it the last stream or the stream before we were talking about the Democrat governor of Virginia and how he was supporting post-birth abortions, literal, unironic infanticide.
Yeah, we were talking about that last time. That was the Lieutenant Governor Northam.
Mhm.
And is there any news on that?
Well, let's see here. We were talking before the stream starts, and apparently he's caught in the Me Too movement. He's been Me
No,
Too.
that's Fairfax. Or is Fairfax the one that said it? One of the one that was supporting post-birth abortions is caught up in either that scandal or the he was wearing blackface back in like 1984. Yeah, yeah,
I think we got a few wires crossed here.
yeah, we do. Um, the the one that's caught up in the Me Too scandal, that's not the one who is advocating for post-birth abortions. The one who is advocating for post-birth abortions is the one that was in the racist yearbook photo. That's not related.
And I know that you mentioned Fairfax. Fairfax County is the seat of the state legislator who did propose the bill. I don't think Fairfax is the name.
It was Lieutenant Governor. Fucking hell! I probably should have you should have sent me an article first.
Shit. Okay.
It's fine at this point. But yeah, let's just say Virginia's got a. There's a lot of controversy in Virginia right now with their governors.
Yeah. And if you want to look back on last week's show, which I believe is when we talked about it, we did go into just how absolutely amoral that these practices really are. And I don't think we need to tell you guys like just how unethical abortion is on every level. As at conception, the developing developing quote unquote cells, I mean they are cells, but yes, they have their own unique set of DNA. They're not going to grow into a Volkswagen. They're not going to grow into a mini fridge. They're going to grow into a person that will be able to demonstrate self ownership, agency, and most importantly, personhood. It is a person. And we know it's a person, especially because even if you still believe in the state, if a crazy guy murders a pregnant woman, the person's going to be held account or going to be prosecuted for two murders, both the murder of the mother and the murder of the child. So I think that's actually kind of a hilarious double standard in terms of how the state treats children, isn't it?
It is, and just really quickly, I am gonna go ahead and make sure we get the record straight on. I'm sorry, we Usually don't have to do this.
All right, well, I'll just continue then.
It was
So,
Northam. Northam was the one that said it, and Northam is the one who's had that racist photo leaked. So he's not the one that's getting me too'd right now.
huh. So more information has come out in regards to this proposal or this proposed bill in particular, namely that the intention is, of course, that these post birth abortions are only going to be used in the case that one doctor agrees that the mother's physical or mental health is in danger by this child. Now, you can imagine physical health being something like, I don't know, the fetus has long, sharp claws and it's going to tear her apart from the inside. Or, she was impregnated by a jewel wasp and the young are eating her alive, literally. Those morbid thoughts aside, well, that's obviously not going to happen. Especially nowadays with modern medicine, the idea that we have to choose between the mother and the child is so absurd.
Yeah, the only real conditions where that happens anyway are conditions where the baby was going to die anyway, in which case it's not really a tough ethical question because yeah, I mean the baby's already dead basically. So
Yeah, and I mean, there's nobody really at fault there. It's unfortunate, but that's the truth. But I just mentioned before physical health. Well, now we get to the giant freaking can of health, and I'm pretty sure everyone here is well aware of the troubles or the pseudoscience that exists in mental health right now, where you have all sorts of mental disorders that exist solely for the purpose of stigmatizing certain behaviors that the government does not approve of. For
and
example,
it's not necessarily just so that certain behaviors are stigmatized. I mean, there are some states where police can involuntarily institutionalize people who are deemed to have mental illnesses that are, quote, at risk to themselves or others. California is one of them. I think
that's
Washington is too, and they're applying that basis for police intervention to a broader and broader range. Now it's not just institutionalizing people, but that's also what these red flag gun laws are based on. Whether or not the police have judged that you're a threat to yourself or others. So, I mean, the field of psychiatry originally why they're they started doing this. They started making up all these conditions was so that they could single out certain types of people, get them all doped up very young, essentially as a way to destroy critical thinking for the people who wouldn't as easily go along with the programs and education. I mean, if you look at the American Psychiatric Association's list of things to diagnose someone as autistic, I mean, it's so unscientific. It's unbelievable that anyone actually takes this seriously. I mean, they literally just have like a list of pre-written things on it, and the psychologist checks off certain points on the list, and if you score high enough, you're autistic.
well, that sounds like fun.
So
And
yeah, you think those who are you personality tests on like Facebook, if you think those are scientific, that's basically that's the entire basis for what the American Psychiatric Association is using to diagnose people as autistic. Now, I'm not saying autism doesn't exist. What I'm saying is that I'd seriously be willing to bet most people who are diagnosed as autistic are just people that the education system is having a tough time dealing with.
And there's also several other mental health diagnoses that exist for that sole purpose,
Oh
like
yeah,
ADD.
autism's not the only one. ODD is probably the most shining example. I think that's the one where most people started to become skeptical of psychiatry, um, because that is just so on the nose. Like, oh, if you're defiant to what an authority figure tells you, that's not because your concerns are legitimate. That just means you're mentally ill.
It's the same damn thing in the Soviet Union. I mentioned this before, but they created diagnoses for something called sluggish, I can't pronounce that word, sluggish schizophrenia, which is to say it was supposed to be an early onset of schizophrenia, and it can be detected early before it really starts to kick in. And if you can take care of it right away, it'll stop all the problems. It's like being diagnosed with cancer, but it's at stage one. It's very easy to deal with. The
And
problem
from
is that slow schizophrenia doesn't exist. The psychiatry in Soviet Union just made it up as a pretense for putting institutionalizing political prisoners without a trial or even the pretense of due process.
And while the American Psychiatric Association hasn't acknowledged that ODD doesn't exist, I mean there are multiple different psychologists and actual doctors who have come forward and basically claim, yeah, there's no scientific basis to any of this. The American Psychiatric Association is pretty much just making up their own artificial criteria to try and put people in this category of having ODD. So basically, it's a lot like autism, the way that they diagnose autism.
Is there a treatment for ODD? Like, do
Not,
they force you to take drugs?
I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it looks like one of those. They do put you on medication from what I'm aware of. Do I think that there's a do I know if there's a cure? No, not that they propose.
Well, I mean, of course not. If they had a cure, then they wouldn't have a problem which to agitate with. But there's also another diagnosis suspicious. There's ADD, attention deficit disorder, which I am convinced does not exist. I have known dozens of people who are diagnosed with ADD in my life, and they're perfectly normal.
I
Maybe
haven't
a little different than normal people, but it's like they don't they're normal. They don't have anything wrong with them. They
Yeah,
don't have
I
attention deficit
admittedly
disorder.
haven't done research into ADD. Well, at least like what doctors are saying about it in like the scientific papers, the brain scans versus someone who is clinically considered to be average, neurotypical, whatever. But yeah, based on the symptoms of ADD and what they recommend and how they diagnose it, it seems incredibly unscientific to me. It's a lot like autism or ODD, where the criteria for diagnosing someone as ADD is so broad that it just sort of seems like something that's selectively applied to people.
Well, the symptoms that they propose are that they don't pay attention in government classrooms, which is which can only mean one thing: the teachers are boring. You're boring your students. You're
No, of
making
course
something
it
as
doesn't.
exciting and fun as history, as philosophy, as science.
No, of
That
course
stuff can be
that's
amazing,
not
but you
what it
made it
means.
boring.
That's not what it means, filthy. It means they're crazy and they need medication.
Oh yeah, I was actually talking to a coworker a few days ago about ADD, and she knows somebody who has been on. like someone roughly our age who has been on Ritalin, which is the commonly proposed or commonly prescribed treatment for ADD, been on Ritalin like nonstop for 12 years. She turned 20, and about that time, like Ritalin stopped working for him. Like her body developed a resistance, so she can't take Ritalin anymore. It doesn't work, and now she is absolutely, completely scatterbrained because she relied on Ritalin her basically her entire childhood in order to be able to focus, and now she has no idea how. She never developed those skills. She never learned to maintain attention or at very least deal with being scatterbrained, and she's absolutely freaking the frick out. And she hates her parents for putting her through the brain melting medication process.
No, don't. Shouldn't hate her parents. She should hate the state because I don't know her background, but I fucking guarantee you that she was put on Ritalin because the school psychologist or whatever they have tried to tell her parents that she had ADD or autism or some other made up. She fit some other made up criteria to have a mental illness. So, and the truth is that she was just being difficult in class, and the school didn't want to put up with her.
That's that happened. But I'm going to disagree in that she should hate that she should. There is some blame to be thrown at the parents too, because well, the parents should have just been like, "No, go away. My daughter, she's fine. There's nothing wrong with her." And it's been like, if nothing else, if she has to take Ritalin, what you do is you just throw the bottle down you pour the bottle into the trash or the garbage disposal, and it's like, yes, she's taking her Ritalin, I promise. Even
Yeah,
though she's really
I can tell you as a matter of fact, this is what they do because I personally have had experience with that. When I was in like second or third grade, the school psychologist tried to tell my parents that I had ADHD and that I need Ritalin. I never took Ritalin, and as you can tell, I'm perfectly fine in my thinking.
well better than perfectly fine, I think. But nevertheless, back to we're gonna circling back to the original topic. If there is so much that isn't correct in psychiatry, if this whole mental illness thing is mostly pseudoscience, it's not completely there, but just most of what's going
No,
on
I'm
is
not
complete
saying
bunk.
mental illnesses don't exist. I'm saying what I'm arguing is that the criteria for diagnosing people, according to the American Psychiatric Association, is so broad that it is not scientific, and there are a lot of people who are being diagnosed as mentally ill just so that they can be medicated so that the government schools don't have to deal with them because they're actually just they're unique thinkers or they're asking questions and being somewhat defiant.
Of course, is not allowed in government schools. But anyways, as I was saying, the circling back to the original topic, it's not difficult to conceive of situations where doctors might diagnose some woman who wants to have an abortion or wants to have a post-birth abortion as having some form of mental illness that would justify it. It could be something like, oh, she has ADHD, and the baby might give her depression or some other mental illness. It might give her sluggish schizophrenia. So she can't have a kid. So let's just go ahead and starve it to death.
Yeah, that is just completely insane. Like, why is it that it's always abortion and not like, maybe the kid could go to a foster home or something? There are a lot of different ways to deal with that other than just, you know, necking it. I don't know. I don't know why. Well, I do know, but why is it become politically acceptable to just go straight to killing it as as the first option?
It's hard to figure out. I mean, you would think that the market
I mean, I know the.
there are a
I mean, you
there are
know.
a lot of couples. Sorry.
I mean, you know why the state and why some of these corporatists and financial elites want it. I mean, this was. I covered this pretty extensively in my video detailing the origins of the progressive movement. And James Corbett has a pretty good video on the history of the eugenics movement. But yeah, Planned Parenthood and abortion that was founded as a way that was founded by eugenicists, and they were directly targeting specific demographics, which they thought were bad kin or whatever terminology they use. I know Margaret Sanger referred to black people as human weeds. So, I mean, it's horrible, but it's kind of funny. Let's be honest.
Well, there's several reasons that they would engage in this. You have the environmentalists who want there to be less consumers in general, thus less economic demand for industry. You have politicians who might prefer to have more percentage of the population be third world migrants who are going to overwhelmingly vote for the Democrat Party and the Labor Party in Europe. And of course, you got the just general eugenicists who are definitely still existing today.
You had the overpopulation control movement, but then that was completely debunked after that bet was taken between one of the main scientists that was pushing the overpopulation myth and someone who was basically skeptical of the idea of a Malthusian catastrophe. They basically had a bet like over 10 years, if the idea of overpopulation was legitimate, then yeah, the world economy would have declined and birth rates would have skyrocketed. But yeah, 10 years later, none of that happened. So, I mean, that was quietly conceded, and that sort of faded out of irrelevance because yeah, it was thoroughly debunked right there. But yeah, since the early 20th century, there have been attempts to try and limit the population, kill babies that are being born. It's disgusting. It really is.
Well, these people don't really have. That's one of the good things about being a progressive, I guess. You have no principles, so anything and everything is absolutely acceptable at all times, as long as it's politically expedient.
Just don't mention the fact that most of the people being targeted by Planned Parenthood, most of the people who are getting abortions are black. Yeah, that's the really fascinating thing about modern progressivism. They're doing the exact same thing that progressives were doing in the early 20th century. It's just that they're advertising their ideas as being racially tolerant or compassionate towards the working class. But
Yeah, 1 second.
Look at what they're doing. They're having black people segregate themselves in schools, and they're having them go and kill their own babies. Like more.
Oh yeah.
Like there's a higher percentage. There's a higher chance that a black baby will be killed now than they'll be born. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
It's
can you hold that thought for a minute?
What was that?
Please hold your thought for a minute because I just checked chat and we have 2 super chats that we didn't address.
Oh, sweet.
First one is from Daniel, $2. He asks, "Is the debate today, SO?"
No, we're doing that next week. Sorry for that.
Yeah, there was supposed to be a debate today, and that needed to be rescheduled for unspecified reasons. So next we have Jeremy.
I was having I had a work-related conflict, but now it's just rescheduled because I was able to make it here last minute, and I had absolutely no time to prepare for the debate. So
Hmm. So next we have a super chat, $20. Thank you, Jeremy James. He says, I believe ADHD is real. I was diagnosed. My mother didn't want me on drugs, so we just addressed the symptoms. I also have other neurological variances like dyslexia and processing deficit. Meds just shouldn't be the first approach.
no, I like I've said a good 3 times now. I don't think that mental illnesses like that don't exist. I'm just arguing that the criteria is a bit too broad to be scientific.
Mhm.
They sort of fall at the demarcation problem, as Karl Popper put it.
And explain the demarcation problem briefly.
Well, it's that the demarcation problem is a rhetorical error in a scientific theory where in its propositional form, it is so broad in its explanation. So it explains so many things, and it's written in a way to basically where it doesn't explain anything, and it's sort of just rhetoric at that point. It doesn't actually propose anything, like it doesn't make any specific observations because it's so broad that it doesn't that literally anything could be pointed to that specific theory and argued as a part of that theory, sort of like the idea of anthropogenic climate change, to where it explains everything up to the point of contradicting itself.
All right. And I wanted to respond to that real quick. I don't think ADHD is real. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, what you grew up with, your experiences, I do sympathize tremendously. And it's a very great thing that you didn't go on medication. That's probably the best thing that well, probably not the best thing, but it's a great thing that your mother did. You should thank her very much for that next time you get the chance.
Like
But in
ODD,
regards
I
to your,
haven't. Well, kind of like ODD, I haven't really observed the proposed brain differences in neurological function between someone with ADD and someone without. So I wouldn't know, but I know as a matter of fact that ODD doesn't exist, and that's how I know that. Is it's pretty easy to find that there's simply no um, explained difference between someone with ODD and someone who is neurotypical.
Mhm. Though I think there might also be a problem in regards to what's the term? Confirmation bias. When you receive the diagnosis from someone with a lot of credibility, like a doctor, and the doctor probably did make the diagnosis to the best of their ability, they probably just did their job. I'm sure there was no malevolence involved. That everything that is different about you, neurologically atypical, is going to be simply a confirmation of the diagnosis, even if you might be completely normal in a vast number of other aspects.
Right, and that's sort of what I've been. That's sort of what I was trying to explain here. I don't
Yeah,
know what's wrong with me today. I'm having a hard time with this shit.
it's all right. And Daniel's he says, "Esso, are you sure you need to prepare?" Omni said he hasn't either.
Yeah, because I have sort of I have this problem where I approach debates, uh, basically wanting to be, you know, not wanting to offend the person that I'm debating with, and that causes some problems with my thinking. That's why, despite actually having a very clear set of ideas and rebuttals to other people's arguments, I do have a generally lackluster debate performance. So I take a little bit to prepare, sort just not the arguments I'm going to make, but the rhetorical style for how I'm going to approach the debate. And yeah, waking not just not uh, the very last minute having a having only like an hour and a half to prepare is just not enough time for me.
All right, so it sounds like that there will be a debate. There just need to be some rescheduled. And Omni, if you're listening and you want to still do the debate, it's still going to go on just between you and Esso. By the way, I
Yeah,
will not be
I
involved.
mean,
And prepare, do your
yeah, I'm
best.
gonna go ahead and host it on my channel when we're able to do that because it's looking like it's not gonna work for a Kool Capitalist Kidz stream.
All right. Uh, Devin Rojas wants me to do a video about mental illness and whether or not ADHD exists. I don't think I will because I haven't done too much research on it either. This is just stuff that I'm aware of from having done some cursory research, but in general, it's kind of low on my priorities right now. As we were talking about, what were we talking about before?
We were talking about the American Psychiatric Association's criteria for diagnosing mental illnesses and how they're unscientific. They sort of fall at the demarcation problem. I suppose confirmation bias is a better way to put it because but they are also the other problem is just that they're so broad they don't really describe anything.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I think we've gone on with this subject enough. Do we um, have another subject? Well, we do, but
Yeah, but I just have one last thing to say about it. One thing I have heard several times is that pharmaceutical companies will deliberately pay doctors a percentage of what they prescribe. So you can see that there is an incentive in overdiagnosing mental illness. The more kids have ADHD, the more of them are on Ritalin, the more money the doctors themselves make. Just be good way to point that out. I'm watching the stream right now and I can see the memes you're posting. We're not even talking about that.
it's just sort of like until I have an actual banner to put up. For God damn it, hold on. Until I have an actual banner to put up for the stream. That's the sort of cutaways I'm going to use whenever I'm looking at a different tab.
Okay. All right, so our next topic, let's see here. We have anarcho-capitalism actually starting to go mainstream
And
in the sense that the
yeah, it's
sorry,
going
you're gonna
mainstream, and we know that it's well. I mean, it's been actually going mainstream for a little while now, and by well, not mainstream, but it's been getting increasingly popular following the 2016 election, and this can be seen in Google Trends that follow in like October 2016. Voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism just explodes in popularity, and that is the meme of anarcho-capitalism, like the Picardia ball, that's been around since like 2013, 2014. But I mean, the timing that it starts to go popular, it's clearly a political reason as to why people are looking it up. People are researching it, and people are starting to, you know, something I've been saying for a little while here that the 2016 election was an attempt to basically propagandize the population by by convincing them that both of the candidates were literally going to blow up the fucking world, the ones that were working against their political interests. So they had to support one which, I mean, both of them were working towards the same sorts of agendas, but one of them was presented to be a little less like the other, and that backfired spectacularly because people who were firmly, in the partyarchy that completely shit themselves, and yeah, they completely became disenfranchised because they basically just didn't want that to happen again. And in researching how they could make it so that doesn't happen again, they started finding that the system as it is sort of perpetuates propaganda, and the problem itself is with elections, so people became disenfranchised, and the so-called fence-sitting voters who weren't really politically informed either way and didn't really have any interests in either side of the partyarchy, they became disenfranchised because in making the only appeal for either of the two candidates proposed by the Republican or Democrat Party being, well, if the other side wins, the whole fucking world is going to blow up. And that's literally what they were trying to argue. Donald Trump was saying that Hillary Clinton was going to start a nuclear war with Russia, and Hillary Clinton was saying that Donald Trump was going to start a nuclear war with Russia. So, those were the stakes proposed, but that backfired spectacularly.
I
And
don't.
as a result, a lot of people ended up looking and finding alternatives like anarcho-capitalism.
Oh yeah, like me and Esso in particular, we came from 2016, and I don't think it was a large. I don't think it was a large part of the uninformed populace. I think it was just a bunch of people who formerly Democrats, formerly Republicans, who didn't find their interests represented in either candidate in either party. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
if you
think
think that's bad, you should see 2020 when you have Joe Biden and Donald Trump running. That'll be hilarious.
Yeah, I don't think that a lot of the people who are disenfranchised now are uninformed. That's just a particular demographic which was affected, the fence-sitting voter, so to speak. And that doesn't even mean they're uninformed. That just means that they don't have a particular they just didn't have any particular allegiances to either party while they were statist. Um, no, I think based on the people that I've spoken to, most of the ANCAPs now are former Social Democrats or Republicans who, in 2016 or 2017, became disenfranchised with the state, and that's how I know this is um, how that happened, both with the trends and actually speaking with a lot of different people. It's the same story every time for the most part. Like most of the ANCAPs I talk to now, that's where they came from. 2016, they became disenfranchised with the system, tried to look for alternatives, realized that the only alternatives that would actually work towards their interests are not possible with the current system.
And pretty much. So let me just go over some more details in the story real quick. So this incident, John Galton's murder, happened in a place called Anarcho-capitalism. I'm not aware is an area in Mexico, not Mexico, was bought out by a billionaire who made his money trading Bitcoin back when that was actually profitable. And as a result, well, he out to so that fellow anarcho-capitalists can build their society. And what ended up happening is that not long ago, well, he was killed, unfortunately. Actually, no, it was it was recent. Just checking the dates real quick. And, well, yeah, no one's entirely sure who did it or why. The prime suspects are a drug cartel since the guy was growing pot in his property.
But the point is that they're basically pulling out all the stops, since Anarchapulco this year particularly was pretty big. I mean, the turnout from what I've seen so far, there have been a bunch of tickets sold. It's safe to say it's relatively it's not mainstream. It'll never be mainstream because the mainstream media will basically be as reluctant as possible to actually challenge these ideas. But now they're starting to slowly like try and spread propaganda. They're trying to, and this article is a great example of that. It sounds like a relatively neutral story, but then you look, hey, well, the Daily Beast, they're generally one of the more so-called progressive outlets. So, you'd think they wouldn't cover a story like this, considering that it sort of contradicts their controlled narrative of cultural relativism between different countries. But yeah, for some reason they're covering this particular story, and one of the strange ways which they choose to represent it is that the Anarcho-Polko is supposed to be a libertarian paradise, which it what it's not. It was never intended to be any sort of society. It's just a conference that happens every year for a couple of days, and it's hosted in Acapulco.
What's You can see the propaganda just in the headline. John Galton wanted libertarian paradise in quote Anarcho-Polko.
Yeah,
Quote, he got bullets instead.
what does this have to do with libertarianism, and what does this have to do with Anarcho-Polko? It literally has absolutely nothing to do with his political allegiance, yet they're, for some reason, feeling like they need to bring that in there. Why would they bring that in there? Oh, for propaganda reasons, of course.
There's literally no other reason to put that there. Of course, most people aren't going to click and read the article. They're just going to see that headline, and then the idea is going to be planted in their heads. Oh, a libertarian paradise is just going to be full of murderers, which I think is where the major real propaganda is.
Yeah,
Watch those headlines.
they're trying to present it like this was some sort of uh, private society or some sort of commune libertarians were living on. But I mean, just a little bit of research into what Anarcho-Polko actually is, and that's not the case. It's like basically a convention. It's like saying that E3 is a commune of gamers trying to create a planned society.
So, what does that make Comic Con?
The same thing, but with comics, according to them. But yeah, they hold no punches. I mean, you go through the article, they're like, well, anarcho-capitalists aren't real anarchists because real anarchists support Stalinism and gulags and centrally planned monopolies on arbitration which control everything and will fucking kill people for drinking coffee, like what happened in Catalonia. That's what real anarchists believe in.
Yeah, sure. Let's let the statists decide what anarchism is. I mean, if men are not allowed to tell women what to do with their bodies, then statists should not be allowed to tell libertarians what libertarians believe. Can we agree to that? No, I guess not. I mean, they don't have principles, so they don't really care.
Yeah, statists, one of the key principles, if you could even call it that, to statism is do what I say, not what I do. In fact, it has to operate around that because in order for the state to exist, it needs to victimize and expropriate private resources forcefully from people who produce them. So if everybody was held to that, what?
I'm just trying to remember the name of that actor who's a big activist for climate change and trying to put a stop to that, who flies everywhere on a private jet.
DiCaprio?
DiCaprio, yes, that's the one. It's hypocrisy, thy name is statism.
Yeah, I think this is just a great example of that, and I think that yeah, you're gonna start seeing that more and more as it as we get closer to the 2020 election, because that's what they're
An article in the first place, but
that's what they're freaked out
the
about.
fact that it even exists indicates that it's becoming, well, quite mainstream,
Yeah,
for lack of a better term.
they're freaked out about the fact that so many people are becoming disenfranchised with elections. And the reason that they want people to vote is because by voting, by getting people to vote, it a means that people believe that all they need to do is just grovel on their knees and beg for people for their masters to enact the right kind of political change. So it shows that they're obedient to the state. Two, it shows that they think statism is ethical, and three, it shows that they think government is they believe in the myth of the social contract. They want people to vote as much as possible. And another reason why they keep people in this illusion, just aside from the fact that it makes the population easier to control, is that yeah, it stops people from becoming disenfranchised, and they want as many people to stay enfranchised in the political system as possible, because if they're not, then they're going to find things like counter economics and actively seek to undermine them. That's a big part of the reason why liberalism was even adapted in the first place. You have to remember that back when Thomas Hobbes and John Locke were putting out literature, they did that under feudal Britain. You know, where in order for publications to be written, it had to go through a writers' guild, and it had to have a royal charter. Basically, it had to be backed by the state, and if it wasn't, it wouldn't be published. Yeah, that was basically promoted by feudalism for two reasons. One, the feudal model mercantilism. It was starting to cause more economic problems than it was actually benefiting the states with, and two, there was like a revolution every other year, so it wasn't actually, sustainable from a social perspective either. So they basically they implemented the system of liberalism as a con, essentially, convincing people that they own the rulers, not the rulers owning them.
And we got a super chat from Jeremy James, $2. He says, "How does ANCAP prevent polygamist cult?"
Polygamous cult?
A cult that features polygamy
I
as
know what a polygamous cult is. It's a very weird complaint because, I mean, if they're just, living on a commune, what are they actually doing wrong?
I mean, I don't condone polygamy. I don't condemn cults, but as long as all participants voluntarily consent, who cares?
As long as you don't get like a Manson family situation, that's fine. But if you do get a Manson family situation, then yeah, if they actually try and kill anybody, well then, I mean,
You get rid of them.
pretty much, private security is going to get after their asses, and people will take up arms and defend themselves.
Now, one thing I've been very curious about is to what extent the state enables cults, just in general.
That's something which I haven't really done quite a bit of research into. I know as a matter of fact that the state enables dependent mentalities because it deliberately attempts to deprive people of their ability to be self-sufficient, and in turn, it sort of environmentally conditions people to a state of subservience to where basically they don't have any real initiative, and more people feel basically like they're in a nanny state. I mean, we could sort of see this back in the early Jamestown colony, um, where you originally had their society structured around a mercantilist model, sort of like what was being emulated in England, but people were starving to death, crime was rampant, and they just changed one rule, which is that you only could you could only use what you produced, and yeah, that brought crime basically down to nothing, and within a week, nobody was starving anymore.
Weird.
It's called neuroplasticity. Basically, the human incentives and their behavior changes according to the environment around them, and the state sort of enables what was going on in the original Jamestown model.
All right. So let's see here. Should we move on to the last topic?
Sure.
All right. Well, this is fairly old because it was actually revealed in December of 2008, if I recall correctly. But it's recently come about now because WikiLeaks just retweeted it, that the U.S. military has weaponized the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank as unconventional weapons, their terms, against whatever political enemies that they determine at the time.
Which is actually pretty short, but basically, what the U.S. will do is they'll go to these various financial institutions like the IMF or the World Bank, and they'll have the IMF effectively place taxes, or they'll cap the interest rates on certain governments in the world which are operating contrary to the economic interests of the U.S. That's
Pretty much.
pretty straightforward. Makes it harder for businesses in those countries to get loans. Makes it harder for people to simply sustain a living. And that's probably the most disgusting part. Is it doesn't even like target the governments in those countries. The raising taxes, the making it basically impossible to get loans from any banks. That's directly targeting the private population within those countries. You know, the people
Well, the
that aren't really in the government in any way and are just trying to basically live their everyday lives.
it's the government has a long and glorious tradition throughout the West of economic warfare in such a way that causes more death and destruction than even the most concerted bombing campaigns. In 1910, I think it was, probably earlier, the British Royal Navy blockaded Germany, preventing their population from getting food, resulting in 500,000 people starving to death. In Iraq, I forget which year, it was probably the late 90s, the United States was preventing Iraq from receiving food shipments as well through an embargo. That resulted in millions of Iraqis starving to death as well. I'm pretty sure you can find similar numbers in regards to Iran's or the embargo and the sanctions that the U.S. has put on Iran. You could probably find something similar with the sanctions the U.S. has put and is continually trying to put on Russia. And I'm sure something very similar is going to happen in Venezuela, though to be fair, they're already starving to death. But what's interesting in Venezuela is that it's not just that economic warfare is used to attack people, it's also used to help people. Specifically, that means the United States government gets to pick winners and losers. while the Maduro regime is going to find it very hard to use international banking to finance themselves as well as their own population.
Oh yeah,
Easy to do so.
they're not just doing
Veto.
it to Maduro either. I mean they've been doing it to countries like Libya when they were trying to implement basically any country that they're attempting to implement regime change in. That's that's what they'll that's who they'll this is where they'll start.
Mm-hmm. They did it. They did it to Ecuador. I'm almost certain they're doing it to Russia and China right now, which is probably their impetus for creating their own international monetary system, independent of the IMF. But suffice to say, I mean, one could argue that it's more ethical than traditional forms of warfare since money is money and it's not actually sending people overseas in order to be maimed, slaughtered, and traumatized.
Still
But
using coercion to basically starve people to death. And that's the most disgusting part. I mean, they attempt to present this, the media and the politicians, as targeting foreign governments, but the part that they'll never explain is that how this specifically targets foreign governments is that it deprives them of revenue because it stops their population from being able to effectively produce commo- produce commodities and trade at a profitable rate for themselves so that they actually have income to be taxed in the first place. So they're directly targeting the populations of these countries, and that's what you have to keep in mind, and that's just disgusting. Especially considering that a lot of these countries which they're targeting are already third world shitholes as a large part of the economic agendas of the World Bank and the UN and these various other international governing bodies.
mhm. By the way, we got another super chat from a bit ago. Jeremy James donates 500. Thank you very much. He says, I don't remember what the context of this was, but he says, men go out in the middle of nowhere to sex kids. I wasn't complaining, asking to learn and then teach.
What are you talking about, dude?
He's probably referencing his previous super chat when he asked about uh, how to prevent polygamist cults, and
Oh,
he's worried that this kind
fucking
of stuff will
kids.
be
Yeah,
happening.
sex with children is a violation of the NAP. It's unethical because they aren't biologically developed enough to be able to demonstrate that they can consent to sex because they don't even have sexual feelings themselves.
And you said polygamist cult. Polygamy is just having multiple wives.
Yeah, that's not
Did
polygamy.
did
Did
you
you
mean
mean
pedophile cults?
yeah, pedophile cult and polygamy cult? Those are two different things. I mean, if they're a polygamy cult and a pedophile cult, then I mean, yeah, that's unethical.
Apparently you have a sweet ASMR voice.
I do.
Yes. There's a comment from Manny, I'm not going to pronounce that last name, who says Esso's sweet ASMR voice.
Oh, thanks. I personally to myself, I've sounded throughout this entire stream like to myself like I'm just out of air constantly. Like that's the thing when I stream I you guys tell me I sound great, but I can never feel that way about myself for some reason.
Just I think you're fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, you kind of always sound the same to me,
All
unless
right.
it's obvious.
But no, I mean, so I we covered all our stories, so I mean,
Yeah,
how
I
should
think we can
we we end it? Well,
I think
we're collaborating right now on a video about the Green New Deal.
yeah, people were actually asking about that. Someone linked an article about the proposal to ban airplanes, which is actually part of the Green New Deal. We'll have a video about that in a few days,
Probably by Monday.
probably, but don't worry, it will be glorious. So, anyways, I think we can show our stuff since this is my channel. So, why don't you go ahead?
I'm Esoteric the Free, and yeah, I've downloaded OBS for this stream. I haven't used it since like 2013, but I gotta say, I love it now. I think I'm gonna start streaming a bit more because yeah, this is fucking way better than Google Hangouts.
Excellent. All right, and if you like what you see, come check out my regular videos. Just check out my channel, and yeah, I do things. So, I guess that's good night. Thank you to everyone who stopped by and watched. We'll see you on Tuesday next week.